Well, that was telling. I went to my collection of bits and pieces. I found a replacement for that bad chromed part. Interestingly, two of them show almost identical stain or lack of chrome than the one we've taken off this camera. So it tells me that that was probably a definitely poor production technique, that when those parts were made, and they were probably made in one large batch or a couple of large batches, the chroming process wasn't done correctly, or the metal wasn't prepared correctly, and as a result the chrome didn't take well. However, we've got a good one here, so that's all that matters. We've got a good one to go on with. And those ugly ones, I'm not throwing them away, because in the fullness of time, one day, they may be just the thing. Now, looking at this is interesting too. This is our rewind knob. Now, the centre of that knob, that's supposed to be chrome. Now, it's obviously brass. Someone has made a mess of that screw, and they then basically polished that whole surface off to cover the fact that they've made a mess of the chrome. So I've got to find a replacement for that. Let's see if I can take this apart and clean it while I've got it apart. We know that somebody had robbed this camera for parts probably to provide good parts for their good camera. Chances are that rewind knob came off their other camera, their good camera. I need to find a screw. Well, I was able to find a good unscarred satin chrome example of that screw. It's not quite the same length, it's slightly longer. I don't think that will cause us any trouble, but we're about to find out. Now, how that came to be damaged is most likely down to lack of knowledge, whoever serviced the camera on a previous occasion. You use a tool to tighten that screw up in the knob, and this retains the film reminder dial, and that's the only time you need to use the tool. To fit the rewind knob, you can then just use your fingers. I'll put something through the fork of the rewind knob here, just tighten it up with my fingers. That's it, job done. So our rewind knob's in place, everything's on the top of the camera except for our meter dials, so we'll do that next. And the meter dials are unnaturally clean. I don't remember cleaning those, so that means that somebody else did that job for us. That's all good. Pop this in place. Oh, I did note when I took the camera apart that the position of this didn't look exceptionally credible to me. That I believed that the meter was probably not correctly adjusted. Well, that would also tie in with other things we've discovered. So I'll just put a little bit of grease on that wavy washer. And meter dial goes on. This pointer goes on there. There's a little wavy washer goes in here. And the screw. I'll just spin that up. Before I tighten that down, I'll just adjust the position of the ASA scale, the film speed scale. If I can find the best tweezers for doing that job. Look just like this. So I probably want to start with that round about there somewhere. Then I'll do up the screw. Once the screw's done up, I can move my meter settings scale to suit. So I'm just going to go and check this on my machine and see how that meter behaves and adjust it accordingly as well as I can. If the cell is failing, it'll never be fully accurate across the whole range regardless of how it's set. Fortunately, that meter seems to be very accurate. That's good. I've made the adjustment, got it so it's set correctly, and that looks to be very good to me. I don't think we'll have any problems with that. You haven't tried the self-timer lately, have we? Let's give that a burn. Hold this lever in, set the self-timer, fire the shutter. Very good. That worked well. I'll blow out any dust from inside on that inner surface of the lens. That all looks good. Time to reassemble the front rings for the shutter. I'll check that I've got them all present and that they're all clean, and we can start putting them back on the camera. Right, let's start cleaning these things up. For the front piece, this is the lens mount. It's very dusty, unusually so. I'll get that dust off and let's clean that with some naphtha. That's right, it had a tiny rust spot on the back of that arm, didn't it? Yep, that's alright. It's not serious. That's not going to cause us any trouble. The front chrome ring is very dirty. It's unusual. It's a bit of a mixture of features, this camera. Some parts are very clean, just like new. And certainly inside the camera, behind the shutter, that was the case. Those parts were very good. And others of these parts are a bit old and tired looking. So I'd say that these components were quite possibly robbed from the camera, and that the pieces we see in front of us came from whichever camera was received the prism from this body. That's very reluctant to move some of that grease. So it's a really dirty trick, that, robbing a camera of all its choice pieces and then throwing it back out onto the market. Alright, that's those three pieces. This piece, that's got a little rusty mark on it, not that you'll see that, that'll be hidden. It's just like a stain really, that won't rust. That's good. And the outer shroud. Bit of dust around the base. Give it a wipe around the inside. Generally that's pretty good. Just use a dry paintbrush to brush away any loose stuff there. That all looks good. Those parts could go on the camera, I believe. So we'll start back with the body. This piece goes on in one position. There's a pin that fits into this little slot here. So it can only go in one position. It's seated correctly and it screws. We should have 4 small screws for this, and they're all in this container here. They're a bit entertaining to install because you're down inside the cavity here, and so they're just awkward to get placed. That's one in place, waiting to be screwed down. That one's not one, that's another part, isn't it? Alright, that looks right. There's not much room here. It's the second one dropped into place. I haven't screwed that home yet. I'll do that when I've got them all down in position. They're awkward on a good day, these things. Three. The fourth one. Well, they're all sitting in position and they can all be screwed down. So I'll run them in. I'm not tightening them up at this stage. On the first pass I just want to get them all started. Now I can tighten them. That's all good, that's done. This ring was sticking to the back of the camera, because this is where the exposure meter is, and the exposure meter has that big magnet in it. This plate. Oh, let's, while I'm busy talking, I've managed to put an oily fingerprint on that piece. Let's just clean that off. Might as well start off all nice and clean. That's better. This piece sits in one place, and the reason it sits in one place is that one of these rivets here has to drop into this hole basically, otherwise it won't swing properly. This can only go on in one position. It's got a pin here which drops into a slot there. And I think we need to be under that boss, which is over here. And yes, that sort of lines up nicely with the everything there. I'm just checking that's all good, that the shutter speed adjustment moves smoothly, and it does. If we had that black disc incorrectly placed, it would be pressure from the rivet on the back of this lever. If that was not over the hole in that black plate, it would be applying downward pressure, and our shutter speed settings would be unusually stiff. But they're good, they're just as they should be. There are 4 small screws that go around this edge, and I'll drop those into position. And then I'll do them up. Now, I've just done a series of videos on making a working camera out of a Retina Reflex parts camera that somebody'd taken apart. However, this camera, which I had no reason to believe had suffered in the same way, it actually had worse things done to it, and has caused me no end of trouble to straighten out. I still want to clean that front plate slightly. So sometimes you just can't see bad jobs coming. Yeah. So I'm flattening out a cotton bud here to get it nice and thin, so I can run it down that groove and pick up that dust and grit. Oh, that looks good. It's much better. This little number plate is the numbers that matches the serial number of your lens. Now we've got 2 more rings to go on here. And again, that's a little bit gritty and dirty, so I'll just wipe that out. And this one sets the aperture. It's a bit awkward getting this in place. Without the ring in place, when you fire the shutter, the diaphragm closes right down to the minimum setting. So this needs to be in place. I'm just going to put a wipe of molybdenum around the rear edge, because this contacts on springs down inside that cavity. And it sits just like that. This piece has the detents for the shutter speed setting. And must couple with the shutter speed ring here. That feels nice, that clicks nicely. This setting ring must couple to that shutter speed thing too. There we go, that's nice. And the front ring here has to go on. Now this is a bit of an act to get on, because basically you have to lift off that setting ring we carefully put in place, drop this into place, then slide that back over it and get this setting ring set back in place so that it'll change the shutter speeds. That's all good. That went fairly smoothly. We have 3 small chromed screws that hold this front ring in place. These are somewhat easily damaged. They're quite small. It's not easy to get them lined up. So I've got one down. I've tightened that. I haven't tightened it all the way down. It's just in place. It's not far away from being tight. You don't want it tight until you've got all the screws in place. Otherwise, inevitably there'll be some slight misalignment and you won't get the screws installed. You'll get round to the last one and it won't go. That's good, they're all in place. I'll snug those 3 screws down. Check my shutter speed ring, that looks good. And the aperture settings and the shutter speed are all working correctly. So far so good. Once more, blow the dust out of that. And I've got the lens to put in, the front lens component. I'm just going to pull off that UV filter and check this lens, and I'm checking the serial number here to see that it really does match the body, and it does. Just blow the dust off that lens. I'm just wiping the inside surfaces here, not the glass, just the lens mount itself, to clean the dust and dirt off it. I'll clean the glass now. There's nothing obviously wrong with this glass. It looked nice and clean to me. I don't expect there to be anything to see here, and there isn't. There's no obvious mark on my cotton bud. Give that a blow and fit this. You must line up the red dots when refitting the lens, and it'll just click into place. I'll check that front surface. It looks pretty good. Let's give that a quick clean. Of course, this has had the UV filter on the front protecting it, so it would be unusual to find a problem there. Yeah, UV filter. Well, it's not a Kodak one, it's a B&W one. That's okay. They make good stuff. So I'll clean the inside surface. And we'll drop that into place, and then we'll clean the outside surface, which is very, very dirty. So I used one cotton bud there to do the initial clean and lift off the bulk of the dirt. I'll use a second one to finish the job. again I'm just using normal old domestic window cleaner to do this. Now, there's a bit of dust trapped around that filter thread on the outside. I'll see if I can get that to lift out, just because it looks unsightly. That's a bit better. Alright, is that all good and clean? Certainly appears so. I haven't set the focus yet. I'm just going to peer out the window and see what it looks like. Oh, that prism, that's beautiful, beautiful. Okay, that's not quite coming back to the infinity position in the finder. I don't know what it's like at the film plane. I've got to check my focus at the film plane, get it adjusted so it's accurate at the film plane, at the infinity position, and then we make sure that the prism image, the image in the prism, matches that too, and then we're good. Right, more work. Okay, well, I've just checked this. I've adjusted the focus of the lens correctly at the film plane, so when I've got my focus ring back hard against the infinity stop, that the image is correctly focused on the screen at the back of the film plane. That's ideal. The viewfinder image is slightly different. It's not focused at exactly the same point. It's not out by much. I've got to adjust the position of the reflex mirror. The adjustment screw is here and its lock screw is here. Now, interestingly, on this camera the lock screw was not very tight. Normally it's very tight. Normally it's hard to move, but in this case it was not, which I think is quite interesting. So I'm going to adjust the position of my mirror here slightly, and you're best to make a slight adjustment, tighten the lock screw, wind and release the shutter and advance it again so that the mirror locks into position, and then check the focus and see if you've moved it the right way. So we're about to do that now, and with a bit of luck it'll go straight forward. Back shortly. Well, that went very smoothly. As I said, I only expected it to be a slight adjustment was required, and a slight adjustment really was all that was required. So that's all done. I've got my focus correctly set so that the image in the finder matches the image at the film plane, which is most important, otherwise there's no point having an SLR. So now I can remove my advance lever, put my leatherette in place on the base, finish put the lever back, put all the other bits and pieces on, final check, and the camera will be ready to go home. Find my leatherette for the base and see what sort of a state it's in. Well, it's very dirty, so I think I'll clean that. Before I glue it into position. This is all corrosion from the base plate of the camera and glue, dried glue. The leatherette on the base here is in better condition than the leatherette was on the front of the camera, which I suppose is hardly surprising since the base of the camera doesn't get much handling, and the fronts of the camera certainly do. They've got greasy fingers grabbing onto them at every instant. So I'll wipe this down with a little bit of naphtha on a cotton bud to remove any loose dust, any grease, anything that would cause me a problem. You can see how that comes off on there, it's quite dirty. Right, some adhesive. Basically it's the same deal as before, and I've splashed a little bit much in that spot, so I'm going to be very carefully spreading that out. I don't really want to get the glue on the good face of the leatherette, so I am being reasonably cautious not to spread it everywhere. Let me just take some of that excess off, I think. The day's warming up, the glue is more fluid, and I think I was a bit too enthusiastic. Oh yes, most definitely. Right. That's good. No great gobs. That looks okay. A little bit on the front face at this point. I'll just see if I can sweep that off. Sometimes adhesive on the front surface of the leatherette rubs away. While it's still soft, it'll rub off and leave no marks at all. At other times, the same adhesive might etch into the leatherette and soften it. There doesn't seem to be much rhyme or reason to that, and I think it's probably down to variation in the mix of solvents that they use with the adhesive at any given time. I'm sure they have a recipe that they strive to match at all given times, but knowing the way that things work, things settle out differently in containers and vats, and they're not necessarily squeezing exactly the same product into tubes at one end of the day as they might be at the other. However, this has gone very smoothly and we should be good. Oh, I know what I haven't done. Let's just peel that leatherette back up, so the adhesive will still be liquid, because we've got two little aluminium patches there which cover those two spots on the base plate. Let's put that in place. One there, which covers that focus adjustment that we'd previously just done, and one for the spring for the capping plate. And this is just so that the leatherette has got a nice flat surface to fit down to. Otherwise you might feel an indentation there, it might show a mark. It's not uncommon to find those little plates missing on cameras that you service, and it's often you've got no reason to suspect that they would be missing when you have the camera apart and you peel the leatherette back. So they're by no means absolutely essential, but like a lot of things to do with servicing, it's best practice to put all the pieces back, even if you don't think they're essential. That's good. Just check my film advance. that's still working. Always check the mechanism at all times when you're working on something, in case something that you've just done has caused a problem. And the quicker you get onto it, the quicker you can fix the problem before you bury it under another layer of mechanism or leatherettes or whatever. These parts are very clean, unusually so. As I say, this camera's been a mixture of parts that are unusually in very good condition and unusually clean, and parts that are obviously not in that state and very likely were taken from something else. So I'm fitting the camera back catch cover and its return spring in place. Now this spring is somewhat misshapen. I haven't really got anything to put that down to. However, it did go into place, and I'll get that screw down in place and check the action. No, that certainly works well. So its mate can go on there. We want our third screw for our advance lever, and tighten those 3 screws right up. And we have our leatherette patch for the advance lever. I'll just give the back of that a scrape. Seems unusually stiff. It's certainly the original adhesive on there. It's quite stiff. So I'll put some adhesive on there. Spread it out carefully, making sure I get cover to the edges. Try and avoid getting this onto the front surface of that patch. Just making sure I've got sufficient cover over everything there. And I can just wipe off that excess because I don't need it. And I'll carefully put the patch in place on the film advance lever. See if I can match the direction of the grain. Yes, that appears to be correct. That's the base of the camera finished with, and all of the outside of the camera has now been dealt with, apart from refitting our focus scale ring and this trim ring that goes underneath it, and the focus knob and its screw. So, time to get those done. I'll clean these components up and then we'll put them into place. Now normally it takes me a full day to do a retina reflex, service one completely. This one's had its twists and turns along the way, and of course with the delays of the extra time involved in videoing it, I've probably got 2 days tied up in this job. I can't be doing that every day of the week. I'll get this trim ring nice and clean. That drops on into the groove on our focus ring at the back, and it leaves a tiny groove around the inside edge. And our focus scale here will fit into that position. So I've got to work this in. and then rotate it round to its correct position so that the infinity line is where the infinity should be. At the moment I've got it in the wrong position. That should be about there, I think. No, one more. That position. Yes, that's definitely it. Now there is one small chrome screw that holds this in place. It's quite shallow, short, very short thread. It's quite a small thread too, but quite a broad head on the screw. So I'm pulling the focus scale ring together. That holds it firmly in place. Our focus is smooth. We have one more component to put in place, and that's this focus knob here, which fits onto that scale ring, and it can only go in one place. There's a tapped hole for it there. So I'll position that. There it is. And if we're very lucky, we will have one screw left. And we do. And unusually, that looks to be in good order and comparatively unmolested. The last camera I did like this, that screw was quite mutilated and very hard to get apart. That's it. So now we have our focus button. Let's blow that bit of dust off the front. That's all good. Just looking in, making sure everything looks nice and clean, and it does. So this camera, which has certainly provided a few adventures along the way, is now ready to go home. Just clean off that little bit of adhesive there that's managed to sneak round the corner. So I'll give that a wipe over, a final check, and that can go back to its owner. So that's how you do a Retina Reflex type 025. That's how you overhaul one. Strip it down, clean it, put it all back together. And in this case, it wasn't just simply a matter of stripping it down, cleaning and putting it all back together, because the shutter gave us the runaround. It was certainly faulty. Other things along the way, well, the prism was ruined. That was you can see the light through that. You're not supposed to see light through that. There's supposed to be a layer of silver and paint on top of that. The rewind knob, well, that was obviously had a damaged screw there that somebody had managed to polish off to try and hide the damage they'd done to it. The collar under the rewind knob had lost a lot of its chrome. Well, anything else to speak of? No, I think that pretty much covers it. And of course the mechanism plate in the shutter that had been damaged at some stage in the camera's history when the camera had presumably been dropped on its nose. So the camera's had a bit of a history, really. It's hard to put it all in chronological order, but most likely it was a nice tidy camera that had been dropped on its nose, which effectively buggered up the shutter, and it had been pillaged for parts for somebody else's camera and then put back on the market as though it had been a good camera all along. It's life, I suppose. Thanks for watching.